So the Senate rejecting a White House-backed border and immigration bill for a second time yesterday. 50 senators voting against it, including two lawmakers who negotiated the bill. Oklahoma Senator James Lankford and Arizona Senator Kristen Sinema. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, he was questioned about it. Watch.
What do you make of the fact that two of the three negotiators, Lankford said that this became a prop, Sinema said that it was political theater? What do you make of that?
I'd look at what they said about the bill. We voted on the bill, not on rhetoric. Both of them to their credit, put their hearts, souls, and minds into this and came up with a damn good product that should have passed until Donald Trump did his thing.
Okay, so meanwhile, the House advancing a bill to repeal Washington, D.C.'s law, which would have allowed non-citizens to vote in local elections. 52 Democrats joining Republicans to approve this measure. 143 Democrats voting against that one. Joining me now is Wisconsin Congressman Scott Fitzgerald. He's a member of the House Judiciary and Financial Services Committee. Congressman, let's go back to those comments from Chuck Schumer just for a second here. Donald Trump did his thing. What would that thing be?
Well, I think, everyone knows Chuck Schumer knows how to count votes. So what we ended up with, Cheryl, was this situation of a lot of people in D.C. wondering what he was up to. And I think at the end of the day, what we saw was that there were a number of members that he thought would be there in the end that just didn't show up on that Senate vote.
They certainly didn't. But look, I mean, President Biden's blaming Republicans for that bill failing for the second time. Now, he's claiming that you and your colleagues are standing in the way of border enforcement. And reportedly now they're finalizing details of a border executive action that would allow the president to temporarily shut down the southern border if needed. It also could come as soon as June, but they're waiting for Mexico's presidential election to happen before they make any official announcements. Because, as we all know, Mexico's president said, sure, I'll work with you, but I want a big payout. And I'm paraphrasing his comments, but he did. He wants money from the United States. So let's go back to this. So this executive action. President Biden has had all this time to secure the border. Now he's coming up with an executive action.
Right. This just proves the point, something we've been saying now for months, which is the president has all the tools available to really shut this down. Now, it wouldn't be like true reform, like you're going to find in H.R. 2, but the fact of the matter is, if he wanted to provide physical security at the southern border, he could do that right now, today. But they don't want to, and they haven't wanted to for months now. Well,
and it's an election year. I think it's pretty obvious to anyone, looking at the situation that the executive order is going to come because he's polling so horribly when it comes to immigration. Let's talk about Texas. The Department of Safety helicopters there captured this video. It was Border Patrol agents in Santa Teresa, New Mexico. They clashed with smugglers and illegal immigrants who are trying to scale the border wall with this ladder. The migrants start tossing rocks, bottles, dirt at the agents. And then Fox News' Bill Maluzhin interviewed a Turkish man who crossed illegally over in California, who is now concerned about who else is crossing the border, believe it or not. Watch this.
Did you have to pay a cartel?
Yes.
How much?
Around 10,000.
10,000?
Yes. In fact, the American people is right, completely true. Who come into this country, they don't know. Well, okay, I'm good, but how if they're not good? How they killer, psychopath, else? No guarantee of that. Why? Like no security, no security check, no background check.
No security check, no background check. You're worrying about who's crossing the border?
Yes. Of course, me, because I'm like, people are not look normal.
They could be killers and psychopaths. That coming from a man from Turkey who just walked across the border illegally. Unbelievable, Congressman. Unbelievable. I mean, the wide open border, it's a global story.
Right.
The entire world knows that they can just come through the southern border.
Right, Cheryl. I was at the Tucson sector 2 weeks ago, and we spoke to some border agents. It's the first time that I had kind of a direct conversation with an agent who up front was like, we are starting to see Chinese nationals come through this sector. We're having contact with them. And that is the first time that they've seen this since the whole Border Patrol issue an issue that the Border Patrol tried to tackle some time ago. So, you know, I think what we're starting to see is the profile is shifting. We've known it's been shifting for some time, and it's becoming even more dangerous because of the individuals that they're having contact with. And that's what Bill kind of ran into there in his interview, right?
Exactly. Well, that's exactly what we saw. Luke Light is on set with me. Luke, you got a question for the Congressman?
Hey, Congressman. In 2005, President Obama said we simply cannot allow people to pour into the U.S. undetected, undocumented, and unchecked. And then in 2008, then VP Joe Biden said sanctuary cities shouldn't be allowed to violate federal law and argued a fence was needed to stop tons of drugs. When did this become a non-bipartisan issue and that Democrats and Republicans don't agree on?
Well, you know, under Obama and certainly under President Bush, I mean, there were discussions about the immigration laws, but the actual physical security was something that both parties agreed on, that you didn't come across the border unless you had legally gone through one of the ports of entry. And now that that's changed, we've heard Jay Johnson say it numerous times that, you know, quite frankly, anything around 1,000 individuals coming across the border, they thought was manageable. You know, now we're at 4,000. And so even people that served with President Obama are now admitting that, you know, quite frankly, it's out of control. And we've obviously known this for some time.
Well, Congressman, one of it's being reported, we don't have confirmation yet, reported that within this EO, what President Biden wants to do is do a temporary shutdown of the border. But my question would be, are you really going to enforce that? Because what happens is, if he does a move like that, he's going to get hit from the progressive left, who are going to go after him for being cruel, you know, in a humanitarian crisis. The same people that are going after him because of the Palestinians.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to his original executive orders that he rolled out when he first was sworn in as president, he sent a signal to the world that the border was wide open. And I'm not sure if it was political at that point or if it was something that they had all come to agreement on in the White House. But the fact of the matter is he sent a signal to the world. They have not been able to stop that flow since then. So, you know, what they're doing now is grasping at straws, right? They're trying to come up with a number, some type of executive order, some type of directive from the White House that they think is going to put us in a better position. But unfortunately, I think the message is so mixed, it's not going to make a difference when you're talking about sending messages to all of these individuals that are coming in, specifically through South America. But I mean, there's other issues out there. They're just literally throwing anything they can at the wall to try and get a handle on this. They know there's a clear erosion amongst their vulnerable Democrats, both in the House and the Senate, when it comes to this issue. So they are politically trying to fix this issue.
With an executive order. Congressman Scott Fitzgerald, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you.